Good morning. I'm Catherine Jean Lopez from the National Review Institute, and I'm delighted to be able to welcome you to this conversation about the movie Lifemark that's currently in theaters and the documentary I Lived on Parker Avenue, which inspired it. It's the adoption story of David Scotton, who is joining us today for this conversation. It was executive produced by Benjamin Clapper from Louisiana Right to Life. And Rebecca Rogers Nelson has joined us. She plays David's mother in the movie Lifemark. And so we wanted to have a conversation about these two blessings, the movie and the documentary, and the importance of adoption and the timing of this movie. It wasn't planned that this movie would come out after Roe versus Wade was overturned, but here we are. And I just think Lifemark is a really important opportunity to be able to have conversations we need to have about adoption and the courage of birth mothers, the courage of adoptive parents, and what a gift adoption can be. David, do you want to start us out? How weird is it to have a movie about your life on the big screens?
It's absolutely surreal to go from someone who really never shared the fact that he was adopted and didn't want people to know, to having the documentary and being able to impact people on the adoption option through the documentary, and for it to reach Kirk Cameron and for him to then involve the Kendricks and now see our story on the big screen impacting so many other people. My family and I are just humbled and excited to be a part of it.
And the Kendrick brothers are behind a number of Christian movies, and so their reach is really quite remarkable. And so that's part of the blessing. I mean, you set out to educate people about adoption and tell your story of gratitude, which is really what I Lived on Parker Avenue is about. And
Absolutely.
It's really got to be an answer to prayer for you that more people are hearing about your story.
Yes, absolutely. You know, Ben and I, who's also on this call, we always joked about it being a movie. We never thought it would actually happen, but it just feels like, reinforcements coming in and they're going to keep the story alive and they're going to reach so many other people that we wouldn't have reached. So we're glad to be a part of the team and for them to come on and just share this message.
Ben, it must have been nerve-wracking in the first place to follow David along as he met Melissa, his birth mother, and really try to chronicle that. It must be another whole level of nerve-wracking when somebody else has the story in their hands and you don't know what it's going to look like in the end.
Yeah, I mean, certainly being able to have David meet his birth parents, to share that with the world, for him to say thank you, that was almost for us at first, just like, we just need to tape this. We just need to video this and get it out to the world. We had no idea where it would go. But I mean, yeah, on one hand, it was nervous knowing how they would tell the story that we created. But I mean, at the same time, we were thrilled with the idea that Kirk Cameron and the Kendricks would want to share this movie. The Kendrick brothers have shared that they've never taken a story from someone else's real life and made a movie about it, but that when they saw the documentary, I Lived on Parker Avenue, it moved their heart to share the story. So that was amazing. But it goes more to David's story than anything with our documentary. David's story is the beautiful telling of the value of a single life and what would have happened if that life wasn't there. In addition to adoption, in addition to gratitude, his story is a timeless story that the whole world needs to see, think about, grapple with, and we need to share the beauty of that story and of adoption.
And it was a challenge to get this movie in theaters because, not to give away a spoiler, but anyone who's seen I Lived on Parker Avenue is where an abortion clinic was. And David's first mother had an abortion appointment and turned away from it with such great courage, which obviously made all the difference in David's life, but also made this a controversial movie, right? Because it's a controversial story. Rebecca, this isn't just a role for you. You have a very close tie to this issue of adoption. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So first of all, thank you for having me on. And I think that what Ben was saying about this kind of continuing the wave, or maybe it was you, David, just continuing the wave of the conversation about adoption. That's the way I feel about Lifemark in general, just the movie, even your story in the documentary. But in terms of my connection, when I first heard about this, it was through an actor girlfriend, and she goes, Becky, there's some really cool roles in the new Kendrick Brothers movie. Why don't you audition? And so I read the breakdown, which is a little brief description of each of the characters. And when I read Susan, I was just like, okay, I'd really like to audition for this. So I called my agent, and she submitted me to Beverly Holloway, who's our amazing casting director. And I was able to audition. And that went well. You get a second audition, you're there. It's all on video. So it's kind of heady because I didn't really know that Kirk Cameron was involved at that point in time. So it's Kirk, and it's Alex, and it's Steven, the Kendricks, and then Bev Holloway, and then Kevin Peoples, who's the director. And they're chatting with me and asking sort of personal questions about my life, because we're going to be together for 7 weeks. And they said, listen, this story, just so you know, is pro-life. It is pro-adoption. Are you okay with that? And at that point, I started weeping, because I'm like, I'm so okay with it. So because that has been my soapbox, my bandwagon, if you will, for the past 14 years. 4 of my 5 children are adopted through the foster care system. And I want to raise awareness, because there are babies and children and toddlers and teens out there waiting for forever families. And I feel like this movie is an opportunity not only for birth moms or unplanned pregnancies and that whole dynamic, which is explored so beautifully in this, but it's also people who have gone through not being able to conceive. What now? Or they conceived their first natural born child, and then they couldn't have any others, which was sort of our case. So just opening up the dialogue, opening up the options, the adoption option, which I think David coined his very own self. I think that that's what's so important about this. And I see Lifemark as this multifaceted jewel, because I think in our minds, we thought this is going to really address the one facet of unplanned pregnancy, but it's opened up to everything. A birth father who didn't have any choice because the birth mom chose to abort, or a birth mom who had the baby and put the baby up for adoption, but never even thought about reconciliation, and the emails and the texts and the phone calls. I'm getting phone calls from my old girlfriends in New York City saying, I think I'm going to have a baby now, even though I never got married. Maybe I'm going to meet somebody awesome and then adopt, I mean, I think people are looking at the adoption option a little bit more closely now, and looking at all the different possibilities for that.
And since you're talking about this, can you also talk about, Rebecca, you have siblings set, don't you, in among
Yes.
your adopted children? And that's such an important issue to be talking about too. To be able to keep siblings together is such a blessing.
Yes. And so just so you know, unlike Kirk, I did not set out to adopt. I love his story with he and Chelsea had a heart for adoption because Chelsea's adopted. For me, I wanted 2 kids and a dog in the backyard. I'm just being real honest with you. But when we had our son, Ben, and he turned 2, we tried again to have a baby, and 2 miscarriages back to back. And so we were like, okay, that's not going to happen. And the doctor confirmed if we're going to grow our family, it's going to be through adoption. So we were Googling Thailand and trying to figure out overseas adoptions. And then someone said, why don't you look into foster care? And we're like, oh, can you adopt? Is that a thing? Like, we were such neophytes. We didn't really understand the process. And quite frankly, it was like trial by fire being in the process. It's much more streamlined now than it was 14 years ago, thank the Lord. And we were in California at the time too, so it's different in different states. But we went to a Saturday seminar for 8 hours, and we were scared to death because in the foster system program, they have to really explain to you all that could go wrong. And there's a lot that can go wrong. And let me just say, this adoption process is not for the faint of heart. Right. You hold your hands open with the Lord and say, okay, what's next? And that's what we had to do. So after the 8 hours, we're like, I don't know if we want to do this. Well, we got a phone call from the seminar, the heads of the seminar who are in charge of the program. And they said, we have a little toddler boy, and he is very specific and special because birth mom is 6 months pregnant. So whoever takes the baby, whoever takes the toddler will also take the baby. And I'm just like, yeah, both baby. And my husband's like, I don't know. So my husband tells a story that he had to pray about it. And I was on the 405 and God's like, do it now. So basically we agreed to go get our little boy, and just this beautiful, big brown-eyed baby with big eyelashes reaching up and calling me mommy right away. And then within 4 months, our daughter was born. And then a year later, birth mom got pregnant again. And so we have the same birth mom and the same birth dad for all 3 of our sibling set.
Wow.
We also have a bonus baby who's 3. That's a whole separate amazing God story. I don't know if we have time to go into it right now, but the Lord told us that an Adelaide was coming during the time that we were having our miscarriages. And our little girl, who's 3, is named Adelaide.
Wow. Wow.
Yeah.
David, what do you want people to take away from this movie? Because as Rebecca just witnessed to us, there are amazing conversations that come from Lifemark.
Yeah. I hope that people will go see Lifemark and realize that I lived on Parker Avenue. And I lived on Parker Avenue because my birth mother was brave. My birth mother was courageous and made a decision that was tough. And she's lived with that decision for 2 decades now. And ultimately, I'm here because of that decision to leave that abortion clinic and choose adoption. So adoption allowed me to live and allowed our family to have a family. So I'm just so thankful for the adoption option. I'm thankful for my birth parents who chose adoption. And I hope that this movie will be a resource to talk about adoption. I don't think there's enough resources out there. And I've grown up as an adoptee experiencing the stigmas behind adoption. And I still get it today. Questions like, what was it like to meet your real mom? What was it like to meet your real dad? And every time the answer is the same. Who I met and I lived on Parker Avenue is not my mom or my dad. It's my birth mother and my birth father. And there's a big distinction between those names. And so I hope that people will see this and be able to talk about adoption in an informed way and be able to realize that adoption is a beautiful, loving option, and it can really save a life and build a family.
And there are even things like the language we use, give up, women are made to feel immediately like they're abandoning the child. But it is one of the most courageous things you can do to say that this child will be better off with, and to make a plan, which is what it is.
Absolutely.
And it is a form of parenting too, to choose that this is going to be what's best for the child. When you encounter that stigma, is it just because of a lack of familiarity, do you think?
I think so. I think people just don't know much about it, who haven't had an experience of adoption, and they just don't know how to talk about it. They don't understand what it is. I'll never forget in elementary school, as much as I tried to hide it, someone would eventually find out because my mom was so proud of it. So she would go around telling people that I was adopted. And so, other parents would tell their kids, and one girl found out and in front of everyone, screamed out, "So you're an orphan?" And I'll never forget that. And it wasn't the fact that she called me an orphan. It was the fact that she didn't know what adoption was. And I think this movie will help with that. I really do. I think other than Parker Avenue was already helping with that, but this movie surely will as well. And like Rebecca had said earlier, I think this movie is so unique because it shows adoption from not just my perspective as the adoptee. It shows adoption from the perspectives of the birth parents as well, and the adopted parents. And not just the birth mother, but also the birth father, because there's a lot of emotions there as well that don't really get talked about that often.
It's quite remarkable to go back and watch the documentary I Lived on Park Avenue when you're encountering your birth mother, Melissa, for the first time, and she, for all this time, has wondered if you hated her, and you just wanted to go and say thank you. But to know now that Melissa's out there speaking about adoption and what a beautiful option it was for her, is really a remarkable blessing. Ben, can you talk a little bit? Were you surprised by how the story turned out in the movie? One thing that I found remarkable, I I didn't think you could ever do justice to the meeting of Melissa and David. And yet the movie does. There's
Right.
so many things that, Rebecca, you do a beautiful job with Susan suffering, and her real trust in God and courage, because she had suffered the losses of two babies already. So if Melissa were to change her mind, I mean, how devastating would that be? Ben, talk a little bit about Lifemark and your experience as someone who watched this real story unfold.
Yeah, I think the amazing thing about Lifemark is, on one hand, it stays so close to the documentary, which probably in the end surprised me that it does stay so close to the documentary.
Shocked me.
Yeah, but one of the really neat things about Lifemark is it was able to expound on the stories about David's life that we couldn't fit in the documentary because we chose to make it a shorter documentary. Things like the fishing story, the way in which Melissa chose Susan as the birth mother. That's one of my favorite stories. You got to go see Lifemark to learn more about it. We actually have that on our bonus footage, but it's only on our DVD. So the fact that kind of gets light, to me, is really cool and really neat. So David's wrestling, David's surgery that he had growing up, things like that weren't able to be discussed in the documentary get fleshed out in Lifemark. And I think that kind of helps to round out the story even further. It's thinking back, almost 7 years ago, when we were like, well, I guess we're going to have to cut this or that, thinking that, man, the world's never going to get to really hear this. And now the world hears it and sees it through Lifemark in a way that we really couldn't tell the story. That to me is an amazing blessing. The other neat thing is that they were able in Lifemark to put to life the things that in a retelling we couldn't do very well. For example, when Melissa and Brian, after Melissa walked out of the abortion facility, which I guess, spoiler alert, but David's on this call, or so I guess you figured that out as much. But I think, to me, those powerful parts of Lifemark were really a blessing to me, because those were in my mind, but getting to see them in the powerful way that they did, to me, that was really exciting. And I think one thing that Lifemark does really well is it doesn't try to shy away from the challenges of those conversations. And that's real life. And that's when people are making these decisions, and Lifemark shows that. And I really hope birth mothers out there who are considering abortion or adoption or parenting, Lifemark for them helps to show that, yes, there are trials in the adoption option, but there's beauty and joy at the end as well.
The other thing I'm hoping from this movie, Lifemark, is, there are a lot of women, obviously millions of women who have had abortions in America.
Right.
And one thing that I think Lifemark does well, I mean, it's not a caricature. It shows the real pain and the struggle of this teenage couple that isn't ready. They don't have food in the refrigerator. How can they have a baby? And I hope it can be a conduit for healing. Sometimes I worry that, I'm often involved in prayer vigils outside of abortion clinics, and I worry that people think we're judging them. We're not. This is, I stand out there as an act of penance, because we haven't done enough, because if we've done enough, then women wouldn't be having abortions. And so I hope that the movie can be a conduit for healing too, because it really, really, with great compassion, tells all aspects of the story, as Rebecca was talking, all the facets of everything that involves adoption and abortion and life and death, really does a beautiful job.
That's right. And this is a difficult conversation, right? I mean, there's no question about it that abortion and adoption, these are difficult questions to deal with personal lives and the most intimate part of people's lives. And it's hard for things not to appear as judging, but look, the pro-life movement, pro-adoption, it's all about wanting to love and serve other people, right? I mean, we're out there praying, we're out there counseling, supporting people, pregnancy centers. I mean, we just want to be a conduit of love. And that's really what adoption is, right? I mean, the birth mother selflessly, out of love, placing their child in a better future, that it's a very intentional action for that birth mother to do. It's one of the most, like you said earlier, Catherine, one of the most selfless things a birth mother can do. It's beautiful. And, it's not always perfect. Nothing really is, on earth. But we know that the beauty that can come from that selfless decision is shown in David's life, in Melissa's life, in Jimmy and Susan's life.
Rebecca, I loved how you talked about so honestly how you hadn't really considered adoption. And I think that's the case for a lot of Americans. And I think this movie is particularly a challenge to Christians to notice that in the Bible, we hear about orphans often, and we hear about adoption often, right? Christians believe we were adopted by God the Father. And so, Rebecca, what's some of your advice for Christians who really never thought about this before? My friend Kelly Rosati, who's an adoptive mother and advocate, she talks about how I think they were looking abroad too, and she found out that there were children in foster care right in her backyard, and you can't unknow that. And it changed her life.
The way that I want to speak to this is, it is a mandate in the Bible. It's not a suggestion, right? To care for the widows and the orphans. So find yourself a widow or an orphan, fine, whatever. But truly, I don't think that this is a condemnation for people to feel judged if they cannot bring in a child. But it is an admonishment to work with people who are. Right. I think that our churches need to start adoption ministries. We have one at our church, which is the reason why we chose our church. It's called Mosaic, and it's so beautiful that they have come alongside people who have adopted through foster care, and then they're bringing them meals for the first week. Some people, they have teens, but they're like, oh my goodness, now I've got this baby and I haven't had a baby in 10 years or whatever, and vice versa. Maybe they might have babies, but then they're getting a teen, whatever. The point is you come alongside through a ministry. And also finding out if people do have children that are coming into their home, to bring them meals, and not even say, can I bring it? No, just bring it, right? Just be bold and bring it. And then also, if there is an expense for overseas adoptions, if you have the resources to then help out someone who's making that huge move in their lives, because it means travel. It means maybe leaving children behind while they go to Uganda or wherever to get their child. So just being able to come along and be the family is so very important. And I wanted to address this too. In the movie, it so beautifully depicts Melissa as the sacrifice and the hero that she is. And I don't think that we really talk about the birth mom as the hero, because she not only had to go against sort of what her easy choice was, but also the birth dad at that point in time did not want to have this baby come into the world because they didn't have enough money, right? So she had to really make this individual choice. And I just think that this is an opportunity for the birth mom to be acknowledged as hero.
There's an organization out of Dallas called Brave Love. And what they do is celebrate birth moms. They even have thank you parties around the country for birth moms to just really make clear that thank you, you did a beautiful thing, which again is what David's story is all about. He just wanted to say thank you to Melissa. And part of what Lifemark does, and I lived on Parker Avenue, is let people know about a world that they may not know about. As David was remarking before, even the mere fact that David and Melissa could meet, people don't often realize that's a possibility. And I know in your family, your children who are adopted are fully aware of that.
Oh yeah, it's been seamless. Adoption has been just part of our culture since the very beginning. I will say that our kids have not had the questions yet, although after watching this movie, we've been discussing it a little bit more, because we every once in a while will say, so, are you curious? Do you want to know, anything more about your birth mom and birth dad? because we have the opportunity. We actually are still in touch with our birth mom and our birth dad. They're not living together, but we're in touch with both of them. So we think that our children should know as much about their birth parents as we know, and the access. We are, making sure that we are lovingly deciding when that time is, but it's going to also be coming from them. If they're choosing, if they're curious, that's when we would sort of assist that, right?
I want to say, if you're watching this live, please feel free to put questions in the chat box. We're talking about the new movie Lifemark and the documentary I Lived on Parker Avenue. And blessed to be joined by Rebecca Rogers Nelson, who plays David Scotton's birth mother in Lifemark. Not adoptive mom, David's mom in Lifemark. I'll get it right. Ben Clapper, who's the executive producer of I Lived on Parker Avenue, and David Scotton. David, can you talk a little bit about this moment in time? That this movie would be out right after Roe versus Wade went into the history books. It really is a remarkable timing, and again, a challenge, I think, to a lot of pro-lifers to think beyond we're against abortion. There's a whole lot more to do.
It's providential. That's the only word that I can use to describe it. This movie wasn't supposed to come out this summer or this fall. I mean, we've been working on this for a long time. And, as many things got delayed with COVID, this was also delayed. And so the fact that this is coming out in this moment in time just shows that God is working through the story. And he's been working through the story since 1993, when my birth mother left an abortion clinic and allowed me to be here today. So to see him working through the story in so many different ways over the past 28 years to now working through it again with the timing of this movie is just so humbling and exciting. And, we've been talking about adoption for a long time. I've always said it's important, but now I think it's more important than ever that we talk about it. And that's exactly what Lifemark is a conversation starter. And again, I love this movie because it shows a perspective from all adoption sides in the adoption triad. And, my birth father originally did, like Rebecca said, he was not for the adoption option. And you see that in Lifemark, you see that in I Lived on Parker Avenue. But that's because, his mother was adopted, and his mother, hated her mother for that decision. So he always thought that I would hate him for that decision to place for adoption. So in his mind, an adoption was worse than an abortion.
Right.
So thankfully, he struggled with that for decades, just like Melissa. And what I love about Lifemark is you have some very strong scenes from the birth father's perspective, where you see him grasp that decision. And just like Melissa, I got to meet him and say thank you. And to him, that was also a relief. And so I'm glad that this movie shows a perspective from him as well.
And that's a common that's very common for a woman or the father to think it would be worse for this child to be in the world and me not be with the child. But particularly when we're talking about babies, which is what is portrayed in your story and in Lifemark, there's so many couples who would like to adopt babies. And part of the challenge is as Rebecca was talking about, there are non-babies who are in the foster care system and they need homes too. And so that's part of the challenge. And what Rebecca was talking about, every church, every community group, just wrap around families who are fostering, who have adopted, particularly from foster care, because there are often trauma issues associated. The longer a child was in foster care, why is the child in foster care in the first place? And so these families need extra support. Every family needs support, but these families need extra support. And David, when you're still a young man, when you decided to
not 30 yet,
not even 30 yet, when you decided to make to go meet Melissa and let Ben hop along for the ride, you had no idea that you were becoming this major adoption advocate.
Yeah, I'm just humbled to be a part of it. I mean, I never thought I Lived on Parker Avenue would be as successful as it was. I certainly never actually thought it would inspire a movie. This has been some of the most humbling experiences in my entire life, to be able to share this story and visibly see it impact others, other adoptees, other birth parents, other adoptive parents, and people who are not even, don't have a close connection to adoption or being affected by this movie. And so I'm just glad that our family is being, able to be a part of this conversation. And if this can in any way give back and allow other people to experience adoption option in a way that's positive, I'm just glad to be here, and glad to have this as now a resource to continue that message.
Earlier this month, the four of us were all at the Museum of the Bible for the DC premiere of Lifemark. And I noticed your dad seemed to be very quiet. What has it been like for him to be portrayed by Kirk Cameron?
Yeah, my dad is very quiet. And so he's the most relaxed person I know that wouldn't be more enthusiastic about Kirk Cameron playing him in a movie. Like, he's just like, oh, that's awesome. And, Kirk came to our house and met my family a few years ago, and we had dinner together. And my dad has a strange obsession with doing the dishes. And he was, so right after dinner, he gets up and he starts doing the dishes. And Kirk's like, do you do this every day? Or are you doing this just because I'm here? He's like, no, I love doing the dishes. And so Kirk's like, you know what? I'm going to help you. And this is going to be in the movie. And so they put that scene into the movie. And so that shows the Kendrick brothers and Kirk did a really amazing job at being respectful to the truth of our story and consulting us every step of the way. And, there's a lot of movies that say inspired by a true story, and they're really not. This one really is.
Rebecca, what was it like to meet David's mom?
I got to tell you, it was an awesome moment. They had planned it, so we didn't know. We knew that the two Davids were going to meet. And so we all left, hair and wardrobe and came out in curlers or whatever. And we were all excited because the two Davids are meeting. This is so exciting. Well, then lo and behold, there's Susan. And then there's Jimmy. And we're all just crying, just hugging. And it's like, you such an honor to play Susan. She is literally a ray of sunshine, which is probably why I'm wearing yellow in every scene. But she's just this solid, confident, beautiful adoptive mom. And what's so beautiful is she was so encouraging about this meeting, right? She was so ready for Melissa to meet David. And I think that's a generosity of a birth mom. And I have to be honest, I'm a little bit more hesitant than that, right? So I think that it was just beautifully done by the Kendricks, as they always do. They always have surprises. They always make something like a Christmas gift. And that's what it was to meet her.
I have to say, I was watching Susan, David's mom, at the DC premiere, and she was walking around taking pictures of all of David's interviews. She was just so obviously elated to have the story be able to touch people's lives.
She's a mom.
She's a mom. She's a mom. There was no mistake in that. Benjamin,
I think she's wanted to tell the story more than David, honestly. I mean, Susan has been the advocate from day one, and I have to remiss David's grandparents, Roy and Gail Daigle. If you watch Roy watch the movie, he's crying throughout most of it. He's probably seen it 12 times every night so far. Just the man loves David, and Gail. They love David so much, and the joy on their faces. They were praying and doing pro-life activities long before any of this happened. So they're just salt of the earth, dedicated pro-adoption, pro-life heroes.
And there's so many people like them who are all over the country, who are kind of like the unknown saints of the right. Pro-life movement, whose names and faces people well certainly aren't in headlines. But right. they're
Catherine, if I have a second, about that, we tried to find the lady outside the clinic in Indianapolis so many years ago as part of the documentary. We unfortunately weren't able to find her. But if she's out there, I would love to meet her and say thank you for telling my birth mother that I had 10 fingers and 10 toes, because she, like you said, she is an unknown hero as well.
And as we see in Lifemark, as sometimes there is, as escorts are bringing women in, there'll be people outside praying, and this one particular woman really got the attention of your birth mom, Melissa.
Absolutely, yep.
And
I'm glad she was there.
Again, since we've spoiled this entirely, Melissa was actually on the table in that abortion clinic when she believed that God was telling her to get up, and I believe the prayers of the people outside and your grandparents played a role in getting her off that table. It's a really remarkable story again, and for this moment, providential does seem to be the word, because nobody could have quite planned it this way. And this was supposed to happen before COVID, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right, a few years ago.
Ben, do you, in the Lifemark movie, do you have any scenes in particular that really impressed you or you were particularly grateful for?
Well, this is one scene that I learned. I mean, I've seen it in seeing Lifemark, but hearing Justin Sterner, who's the character or the actor that plays Nate, who was, a breath of fresh air to the movie. He did such a great job and really brought something, that comedic relief that, really, and I lived on Parker Avenue, it was never really meant to do that, right? So, but when David and Nate are driving home on the train, and they're talking about Parker Avenue, which obviously, to me, I'm kind of biased. That's a really cool thing that they brought that in, because we spent hours, weeks, days trying to find the right title, and it just kind of popped in our head. And Philip Braun, who's the director of I Lived on Parker Avenue, he's the one that actually went with David and did the filming. But so kind of Nate is kind of Philip in that sense. But, I'll marry two scenes together. One is from I Lived on Parker Avenue, is at the end when Susan and Jimmy give Melissa the scrapbook. So you got to go see I Lived on Parker Avenue. So they give Jimmy this, and they give Melissa the scrapbook of all David's friends and families who've written letters to Melissa saying thank you. But then Nate brings that in, Lifemark, by telling David, when Nate is talking about his sister, he says that baby could be somebody's best friend. And I think in abortion, we get focused in talking about the mom and the baby, and we forget that the people surrounding that child's life as that child grows, who is going to be blessed and touched by that child's life. And that's one of the beautiful things about David's life, is David has all these people in his life who didn't know Melissa, may not even have known David's parents, Jimmy and Susan, but they've been impacted and blessed by just David as a human being. And, it just, when Nate says that, it makes me stop and think of all those friends we're all missing from children who are not here because of abortion. So that scene for me really personalized what we do in advocating for the right to life. It makes it real, it makes it personal, because David is a walking reminder of the lives that are not here because of abortion. That touches me, that impacts me, and that motivates me to continue to speak for those who have no voice and who have no life in many situations. So to me, those two scenes, one from Lifemark and then one from I Lived on Parker Avenue, are similar, and they share that beautiful message. So I really like that.
There's a ministry called abortionchangesyou.org is the website. And the idea is to acknowledge that if you've had an abortion and you feel lost, that's because there's a real loss. Or if your brother, was involved with an abortion, and he's acting strange, that makes sense because there's an impact there. And so again, I hope this movie can bring people to healing too, if they did choose abortion, which obviously millions of Americans have done. And I hope Lifemark can be life-giving to them, as well as to people who are already pro-life or pro-adoption. We only have a few minutes left. I want to give everybody a last word. Rebecca, do you want to start us off?
I would like to say this in terms of like the moments that are so special. And David already mentioned the idea of the birth dad having and being impacted by this as well. And one of my favorite scenes is when Jimmy is visiting Brian along with the whole birth family, and Jimmy's in the kitchen and Brian comes in and says, thank you. Thank you for raising this boy, because I don't know if I could have done it at the time that I had this boy. So you did a great job. And then he walks out, and Kirk Cameron, you see the impact of that as an adoptive dad. Like, wow, I'm being thanked by the birth dad. That's impactful. And then David comes in and there's silence, and then just this hug. So it's sort of this full circle moment of the dad situation, right? Just kind of redemption there. So I love that. But I think the takeaway for me is the idea of caring for the widows and the orphans, and kind of what we've already touched on. If you cannot bring home a widow or an orphan, then help someone who is.
Absolutely. Benjamin?
Yeah, well, first, Catherine, I appreciate you being a cheerleader and an advocate for. I lived on Parker Avenue before it was cool, and now Lifemark as well. So I definitely appreciate that from you. I mean, my message is that people have today to go see Lifemark. I think it's in most theaters today. I think it's in many theaters tomorrow, but I want to say after tomorrow, maybe it's run-ins, maybe it's in some places. But just encourage everyone to go see Lifemark, bring a friend, and share the good news about adoption. Right now, we need more babies being placed for adoption. There are families that want to adopt, but we need the change of heart in America to want to, especially in this post-Roe environment, place children for a loving future with adoption. Thanks, Catherine.
As David loves to talk about, the adoption option, it's nothing to be ashamed of. It's something that we should be celebrating. David, do you want to have any last words about Lifemark?
Yeah. So I hope that everyone will go see it. It's a once-in-a-lifetime movie, and it'll go to streaming and DVD, but it is so cool to see it in the big theater. And I like to say, one of my favorite scenes was with Kirk as well. When he comes in to David Colton in my room and says, God gave you to me and Mom as a gift, and you will always be our son. That gets me every single time. And there's something about that line that resonates with me. And I think it's because I've always had this worry that this journey, which seems to never stop changing, would in some way be construed as a journey to replace. And so my number one fear with all of this, really before I even consented to live in Parker Avenue, was just I didn't want my mom and dad to feel replaced. I didn't want them to feel that I was going on this journey to search for something more, because I wasn't. And that's why the letter scene in the documentary and the letter scene in the movie, which is almost verbatim from the documentary, is so powerful to me, because I just wanted to put into words what my family and my friends meant to me at that time, and just say, like, you're my mom, and this is not I don't want you to feel uncomfortable, and that was important to me. And so those two scenes get me every time I watch the documentary and the movie. And I just hope people go see this movie and realize that adoption is an option. It's a loving option. And it's an option that affects people for a generation and generations after that. Adoption is a beautiful option. And I think this movie will help us reclaim the beauty of adoption.
The scene that made me burst out into tears in Lifemark is when you are the adoption lawyer, and Melissa hands over the baby to the adoptive parents, and your actual mom opens the door as a nurse. It's just so beautiful to see. Rebecca mentioned redemption. There's also reconciliation, and that's part of what, David, you've experienced. There are all of these relationships, and they're all beautiful, and they're all blessed, and it's a real great gift to be able to know that and see that. And it's really just a beautiful thing that you've done, David, letting us all in on your story now in this remarkably big way with Lifemark. And so thank you, David. Thank you, Ben. Thank you, Rebecca. It's so good to meet you. And thank you for the beautiful job you do in this movie. and also the ministry that you have, because you have such a heart for adoption. Thank you on behalf of the National Review Institute, everyone who watched this live, and please share this on YouTube with friends, because this is a conversation we need to have often, and to keep going. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having us, Catherine.
Thanks, Catherine.